Today, I want to tell you a story about a determined homesteader who crosses paths with a formidable Cheyenne warrior. She expects a fight for her life. What she receives instead is an act of unexpected mercy that will bind their fates and force them to choose between their peoples and each other. Can we show our support for this incredible story of courage and impossible choices and reach 100 likes? The Wyoming sky was a vast, unforgiving blue. 19-year-old Cora Hayes felt its weight as she guided the wagon along the dusty trail toward Fort Laramie. The steady creak of the wheels was the only sound besides the whisper of the wind through the prairie grass. It had been 2 months since the fever took her father, leaving her with his debts and this solitary path. Each mile was a testament to his teachings, a quiet promise she refused to break. The worn leather reins felt familiar in her hands, a final connection to the man who had taught her how to survive in a land that offered little comfort. Her simple calico dress was coated in dust, and her auburn hair had escaped its bun, whipping across her determined face with every gust. They appeared without a sound, materializing from the landscape as if born of the dust and sun. 6 Cheyenne warriors on painted ponies blocked the path ahead. Their presence was sudden and absolute, a wall of silent power. Their leader, a man with a strong jaw and eyes as dark as obsidian, dismounted and walked toward her. His name was Cheyenne. Cora's heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. Fear, cold and sharp, tried to seize her, but she pushed it down. Her father's voice echoed in her memory. Courage is not the absence of fear, but acting in spite of it. With hands that she willed to be steady, she lifted her Winchester rifle from the seat beside her and held it ready. The warrior, Cheyenne, stopped a dozen paces from the wagon. He did not raise a weapon. His gaze moved from the rifle she held to her face, assessing her with an unnerving calm. "You are far from any settlement," he said, his voice deep and even. His English was clear, with only a trace of an accent. "This is a foolish place to travel alone." Cora swallowed, her throat dry with dust and apprehension. "I have business at the fort," she replied, her voice quieter than she intended but firm. "Let me pass, and there will be no trouble." She held his gaze, refusing to look away. To show weakness now would be to invite disaster. She had to be as unyielding as the land itself. A flicker of something unreadable passed through Cheyenne's dark eyes. It was not anger or aggression, but perhaps surprise. He was accustomed to tears or pleas. Not this quiet defiance from someone so clearly outmatched. He glanced at his men, who watched the exchange with stoic patience. The tension was a physical thing. A tight cord stretched between the lone wagon and the mounted warriors. He looked back at Cora, at the way she held the heavy rifle, at the resolve hardening her soft features. Her unwavering gaze was a challenge, a silent declaration that she was not the easy prey he might have expected. This was not how these encounters were supposed to unfold. Cheyenne took another step closer, his focus entirely on Cora. He studied her as a hunter might study an unusual track in the dirt. Business is a poor reason to risk your life. There are things more valuable than money. His words were not a threat, but a statement of fact. Cora lowered the rifle just a fraction, a gesture of de-escalation. For some, money means survival. It means keeping a roof over your head and honoring a father's memory. She did not want to reveal her vulnerability, but the truth of her situation was a weight that could not be concealed. She saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes, a shared recognition of the harsh realities of life. "Your father is gone?" Cheyenne asked, his tone softening almost imperceptibly. Cora nodded, not trusting her voice. She explained the fever that had swept through their small homestead, the doctor who had arrived too late, and the banker in Laramie, who now held the deed to her family's land. She spoke of the debt, not with a plea for pity, but with a simple, hard honesty. It was her burden to carry, and she would carry it. She would not let some stranger, even one who held her life in his hands, see her as a victim. Her pride was the only armor she had left, and she wore it with a fierce determination that mirrored the unforgiving landscape around them. Cheyenne listened without interruption. his gaze never leaving her face. Her story resonated with him in a way he had not anticipated. His own people were fighting for their survival, for their land, for their very way of life against a tide that threatened to wash them away. He saw in this young woman not an enemy or an intruder, but a fellow traveler on a difficult road. Her struggle, though smaller in scale, was born of the same spirit as his own. He respected her refusal to surrender to despair. He understood the fire that burned behind her tired eyes, the same fire that fueled his own heart in the face of overwhelming odds. He saw a warrior spirit in an unexpected form. He made his decision. He gave a quiet command in his native tongue to his men, who shifted in their saddles, their expressions a mixture of confusion and obedience. Cheyenne turned his attention back to Cora. "Courage should not be wasted," he said. "Your path is a dangerous one, but today you will travel it unharmed." He saw the disbelief in her eyes, followed by a wave of cautious relief. He had come upon her expecting a simple prize, a wagon of goods to supply his people. Instead, he had found something far more rare, a strength that commanded his respect. In a world defined by conflict, he chose a different path, a choice that would set them both on a new, unforeseen course. Before turning to leave, Cheyenne paused. "The trail to the fort is not safe. There are others who will not be as patient as I have been. They see a lone wagon, and they see an opportunity." His warning was stark and clear. He was offering more than just his own mercy. He was offering guidance, a gift far more valuable than any of the supplies she carried. Cora listened intently, her fear replaced by a growing sense of astonishment. This man, who she had been taught to view as a savage, was showing her a kind of honor she had rarely seen among the men in town. He was treating her not as a woman, but as a person worthy of respect. "There is a trading post south of the river, run by a man named Rico Sandoval," Cheyenne continued. "He is a man of his word. He deals fairly with all people, both ours and yours. If you trade with him, you may find a safer path for your business." He was giving her a key to survival in this land, a piece of knowledge that could change the course of her future. The information was delivered with a simple gravity that left no room for doubt. He was entrusting her with a secret, a bridge between two worlds that rarely met in peace. It was a gesture of profound trust, one that she did not yet fully understand. His warriors watched in silence, their faces unreadable masks. This was not the way of a raid. Their leader was acting as a guide, a protector. The moment was surreal. Cheyenne held Cora's gaze for a final, long moment. In his eyes, she saw a depth of sorrow and a strength that seemed as old as the mountains themselves. It was a silent communication, an acknowledgement of the invisible thread that had been woven between them in this short, tense encounter. No other words were needed. The understanding that passed between them was more powerful than any spoken language. It was a recognition of a shared spirit in a divided world. Then, as quickly as they had appeared, they were gone. Cheyenne mounted his pony in a single fluid motion, and he and his warriors turned and melted back into the vast, sun-drenched plains, leaving only a cloud of dust to mark their passage. Cora stood motionless beside her wagon, the heavy rifle suddenly feeling leaden in her arms. The silence that descended was more profound than before. She was alone again, that something had fundamentally changed. The world no longer felt as simple as it had that morning. An act of unexpected honor from an enemy had planted a seed of doubt and wonder in her heart. Cora completed her delivery at Fort Laramie, the transaction feeling hollow and mundane after her encounter on the plains. The gruff quartermaster and the boisterous soldiers seemed like men from a different world. On her return journey, Cheyenne's words echoed in her mind. The thought of facing the open trail again filled her with a new kind of dread, but his advice offered a sliver of hope. She made a choice. Turning her wagon south, away from the familiar path, she placed her trust in the words of a man she should have feared. It was a gamble, a leap of faith into an unknown territory, both on the map and in her own heart. She found the trading post nestled in a hidden valley, a chaotic but vibrant mix of cultures. She was greeted by Rico Sandoval, a man whose weathered face was framed by graying hair and whose shrewd eyes held a spark of warmth. He smiled as she approached. "Ah, you must be the woman with the courage of a badger," he said, his voice a friendly baritone. "Cheyenne sent word you might be coming. He said to treat you with respect." Rico's words sent a surprising jolt of warmth through her. Cheyenne had not only spared her but had also taken the time to ensure her safety, a gesture of profound and unexpected care. After a successful trade, Rico invited her to share a meal by his fire. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in fiery hues, his friendly demeanor faded, replaced by a deep concern. "I am glad you are here, señorita," he said, his voice low. "But you must know, the world is about to change. Trouble is coming, like a great storm from the east." Cora felt a knot of dread tighten in her stomach. The peace she had felt just moments before evaporated, replaced by a chilling premonition. She knew, with a sinking certainty, that his words were connected to Cheyenne and his people. "The army is gathering," Rico explained, his eyes dark with worry. "Generals in Washington have grown impatient. They are planning a great campaign, a final sweep, to push all the Cheyenne onto the reservation lands in the South. They say it will be the end of the war." He paused, the crackle of the fire filling the silence. "But it will not be an end. It will be a slaughter. They are sending thousands of soldiers. For Cheyenne's people, there will be nowhere to hide. This land, their home for generations, will soon run with blood." The terrible finality of his words hung in the air, a death sentence for a people she was just beginning to understand. As if summoned by Rico's grim prophecy, a lone rider galloped into the camp. He was Cheyenne, his face a mask of desperation and exhaustion. He slid from his horse and spoke in rapid, urgent tones to Rico. Cora could not understand the words, but the language of fear and grief was universal. She saw Rico's face harden, his eyes reflecting the terrible news. He placed a steadying hand on the young warrior's shoulder before turning to Cora, his expression bleak. The vague threat of war had suddenly become a brutal, immediate reality. Something terrible had happened. "It has begun," Rico said, his voice heavy. "A patrol from the fort found Cheyenne's band 2 days ago. They attacked at dawn, without warning." He recounted the rider's story, a tale of chaos and loss. The soldiers had been merciless. Several warriors had fallen in the first moments of the ambush, trying to give the women and children time to escape. The survivors had scattered into the hills, losing everything: their horses, their winter provisions, their shelter. They were left with nothing but the clothes on their backs and the grief in their hearts. The abstract campaign had found its first victims. Cora's first thought was of Cheyenne. "Is he?" she began, unable to finish the question. Rico understood. "He is alive," he confirmed, "but he was wounded. He took a bullet to the shoulder while helping the others get away." The rider explained that the small, shattered group was now hiding in a series of rocky canyons, a place difficult to find but impossible to live in. They were trapped, weakened, and exposed. The news struck Cora like a physical blow. The man who had shown her mercy was now wounded and hunted, his people on the brink of destruction. She felt a fierce, protective instinct rise within her. The first chill of an early winter was already in the air. Without horses or supplies, Cheyenne's people would starve or freeze long before the army found them again. In that moment, Cora made a decision that would forever alter the course of her life. There was no hesitation, no weighing of risks. There was only a clear, unshakable certainty. Cheyenne had chosen mercy for her. Now she would choose it for him. "We have to help them," she said to Rico, her voice filled with a resolve that surprised even herself. "Load my wagon. I will take them everything I have." She knew it meant being branded an enemy to her own people, but she did not care. Guided by the young Cheyenne warrior, they journeyed into the Badlands, a maze of stone and shadow where no wagon was meant to travel. Rico rode alongside, his face a grim mask of determination. They pushed the horses and themselves to their limits, knowing that every hour mattered. The landscape grew more treacherous, the wagon lurching over rocks and through dry creek beds. The journey was a silent, desperate race against time, with the lives of Cheyenne's people hanging in the balance. Cora's own troubles, the debt and the ranch, seemed small and distant now, eclipsed by the urgency of her new purpose. The sight that awaited them in the hidden canyon was one of utter desolation. The proud people she had seen on the plains were now a huddled group of refugees, their faces etched with grief and despair. Their hope was gone. She saw Cheyenne sitting apart from the others, his back against a cold rock wall. He looked smaller, diminished by the pain of his wound and the crushing weight of his responsibility as a leader who could no longer protect his people. When his eyes met hers, she saw not a fierce warrior, but a man carrying the sorrow of a dying nation on his shoulders. Her heart ached for him. She knelt beside him without a word, opening the medical kit her father had always kept in the wagon. The bandage on his shoulder was a crude strip of cloth, soaked through. Gently, she cleaned the wound with carbolic acid and applied a poultice of powdered yarrow to stem the bleeding and fight the infection, a remedy she had learned from her mother. As she worked, others began to distribute the food and blankets from her wagon. A quiet gratitude, too deep for words, filled the small canyon. For the first time in days, there was a flicker of hope in the eyes of the Cheyenne. But Cora knew it was not enough. The supplies would only last a short time, and the army would eventually find them. Looking at the tired faces of the women and the frightened eyes of the children, she knew she had to do more. "Come with me," she said to Cheyenne, her voice low but clear. "My ranch is hidden deep in the hills. It is isolated. The soldiers will not look for you there. You can spend the winter in safety." It was a wild, reckless offer, an act of treason that could lead to her own ruin. But looking at the man who had spared her life, she knew it was the only choice she could make. Cheyenne's people debated her offer in hushed, urgent tones. To trust her was a monumental leap of faith, to place their lives in the hands of one of the very people who were destroying them. It was Cheyenne's aunt, a wise elder named Naya, who made the final decision. She looked at Cora with eyes that seemed to see into her very soul. "The spirits move in mysterious ways," Naya said in her own tongue, her words translated by the young warrior. "They have sent this woman to us. Her heart is strong, and her path is now our own." A quiet consensus rippled through the small group. They would trust her. They would go. The decision was made just in time. As they began to prepare, the distinct crack of a rifle shot echoed from the mouth of the canyon. A scout cried out a warning. An army patrol, relentless in its pursuit, had found their trail. Panic flared, but Cheyenne's voice, though weak, cut through the fear with calm authority. There was no time to lose, no room for error. The escape was a blur of frantic, disciplined motion. The hope that had flickered just moments before was now threatened with being extinguished forever. Their brief respite was over. The hunt had resumed. The escape was a desperate scramble in the fading light. The most seriously wounded and the elderly were carefully placed in Cora's wagon, turning it from a supply vehicle into a lifeline. Those who could still walk gathered the few belongings they had left. They moved with a practiced efficiency born of a lifetime of uncertainty, their movements swift and silent. Cora took the reins, her knuckles white, as she guided the heavy wagon over the treacherous ground. The race against the soldiers had begun, a desperate flight for survival under the cold gaze of the rising moon. They fled into the darkness, a ghost-like procession through the winding canyons. Cheyenne, despite his injury, rode a borrowed horse beside her wagon, his presence a silent source of strength and comfort. His face was a stoic mask, but Cora could feel the weight of his gaze on her. In the shared peril of the night, a powerful, unspoken bond formed between them. She was no longer just a settler, and he was no longer just a Cheyenne warrior. They were two people bound by a shared fate, fleeing a common enemy. She knew then, with absolute certainty, that her life was now inextricably linked with his. For 3 days and nights they moved through the wilderness, pushing themselves to the brink of exhaustion. The soldiers were never far behind. Finally, on the dawn of the 4th day they saw it, the small, hidden valley that held Cora's ranch. A wave of relief washed over the weary group, but it was short-lived. A thin ribbon of smoke curled from the chimney of her small cabin, and tethered to the fence post were 3 horses, their saddles bearing the unmistakable brand of the United States Army. The soldiers had outmaneuvered them. The sanctuary had become a trap. Despair, cold and bitter, settled over them. Quickly, Cheyenne directed his people into the cover of the dense woods that bordered the valley. They faded into the trees, becoming invisible shadows. A new plan was needed. "You and Rico must go in alone," Cheyenne said to Cora, his voice a low whisper. "Pretend you are just returning from your trip. Find out how many there are and what they know." It was a dangerous gamble. Cora's heart pounded with fear, but she nodded in agreement. She and Rico descended into the valley, their faces arranged into masks of weary innocence, their minds racing with the terrifying reality of what awaited them inside her home. The moment Cora stepped into her cabin, she knew the ruse had failed. Sergeant Corbin sat at her father's table as if he owned it, a cold smile on his face. 2 other soldiers stood guard by the door. "Miss Hayes," Corbin said, his voice dripping with false courtesy, "we were beginning to worry about you. You have been keeping some very interesting company." His eyes were like chips of ice, devoid of any warmth or compassion. He knew. The confrontation she had feared was here, and there was no escape. The small, familiar cabin suddenly felt like a cage, the air thick with menace. "I do not know what you mean," Cora said, trying to keep her voice steady. Corbin's smile vanished. "Do not play the fool with me. We know you have been aiding the enemy. That is treason." He stood up, his hand resting on the weapon at his hip. "Tell me where the heathens are hiding, and I might be able to persuade the judge to be lenient." As he took a threatening step toward her, the cabin door swung open silently. Cheyenne was there, moving with a predator's grace despite his wound. In a heartbeat he crossed the room, and the cold steel of his hunting knife rested against Sergeant Corbin's throat. A deadly silence fell over the room. The air in the cabin was so thick with tension it was hard to breathe. The 2 soldiers tensed, their hands moving toward their weapons, but Rico already had his own revolver aimed squarely at them. In the heart of the standoff, Cora found a strange, cold calm. Panic would get them all killed. "Sergeant," she said, her voice clear and even, breaking the suffocating silence. "Think very carefully about what you do next." Her words were not a plea, but a command for reason in a moment, teetering on the edge of violence. She had to control the situation. She had to find a way out that did not end in bloodshed. "This man," Cora continued, gesturing toward Cheyenne, "could have left me for dead on the prairie a month ago. Instead, he showed me mercy. He could end your life right now, but he is not. He is offering you a choice." She looked from Corbin's frightened eyes to the faces of the other 2 soldiers. "He is showing you an honor that your army has forgotten how to practice." She let the words hang in the air, a challenge to the men's own sense of right and wrong. She was not just arguing for their lives, she was arguing for a different way, a path that did not have to lead to endless war. She saw a flicker of uncertainty in Corbin's eyes and pressed her advantage. "There is another way," she said, her voice firm. "Give us a truce. 2 weeks. No soldiers, no hunting, just 2 weeks of peace. I give you my word that I will convince Cheyenne's people to go to the reservation. They will go peacefully, with their dignity intact. No more of your men have to die. No more of their children have to starve." It was a desperate, audacious gamble, a proposal born of hope in a hopeless situation. She was offering him a victory without a fight, a solution that could save everyone. Sergeant Corbin, with the cold edge of the blade against his skin, stared at the determined woman before him. He saw no deception in her eyes, only a fierce conviction. He weighed his options: a bloody end in a remote cabin, or a peaceful resolution he could claim as his own victory. He gave a slight, tense nod. After the soldiers had departed, a profound silence filled the room. The immense strain of the last few days washed over them. Cheyenne slowly lowered his knife. He looked at Cora, his dark eyes filled with a mixture of exhaustion and awe. An understanding deeper than any words passed between them, and in the quiet of the cabin he gently touched her face, his thumb tracing her jawline in a gesture of profound tenderness. The 2 weeks that followed were a whirlwind of frantic activity. Cora was no longer just a freighter, she was a diplomat, a negotiator for peace. She sent Rico with letters to everyone she could think of, influential merchants, old friends of her father, even a territorial delegate she had met once. She pleaded their case, describing the honor of Cheyenne's people and the futility of more bloodshed. She poured all her energy into this one slim chance, working tirelessly from dawn until long after dusk. It was a race against a deadline that could mean the difference between life and death for the people she had sworn to protect. Help arrived from a direction neither of them had anticipated. A group of Quaker missionaries who had been working for years to promote peaceful coexistence heard of the standoff. They saw in Cora's plea an opportunity to prove that negotiation was more powerful than force. They arranged a formal council, bringing officials from the Bureau of Indian Affairs and a reluctant army captain to Cora's small ranch. The fate of Cheyenne's people would be decided not with weapons on a battlefield, but with words around her father's worn wooden table. It was a fragile hope, but it was all they had. At the council, Cheyenne spoke. He did not speak of war or grievances. Dressed in simple but dignified buckskin, he spoke of his people's love for the land, of their desire to raise their children in peace, and of the sacred traditions they wished to preserve. His words, delivered with a quiet eloquence and translated by Rico, painted a picture not of savage warriors, but of a proud and dignified people pushed to the brink. His powerful testimony, combined with the Quakers' reasoned arguments, slowly began to shift the hardened attitudes of the government men. They began to see a solution beyond simple extermination. 6 months later, the sun set over a valley transformed. Cora's ranch had become a small, thriving community, a sanctuary where Cheyenne families worked alongside settlers who had chosen compassion over prejudice. A fair agreement had been reached, granting Cheyenne's people a protected section of land where they could live according to their traditions. Cheyenne had chosen to stay with Cora, acting as a bridge between their two worlds. Their love, forged in the crucible of fear and violence, had built something new and beautiful. Together, they had proven that even in a land torn by hatred, the strongest frontiers were those of the human heart, and that courage and love could make even the most barren ground bloom.